When janitor Aisha Coleman overheard her boss say, "Don't hire her dad," through his office door, she never imagined those same hands that dismissed her family would soon be clinging to her for dear life in a flooded basement. The property owner, who saw her as nothing more than a complication, was about to discover that sometimes the very people you look down on become the ones who hold your fate in their hands. As storm waters rose and emergency alarms failed, Aisha faced an impossible choice: save the man who had crushed her father's dreams, or let the darkness of that basement become his tomb. What she decided in those terrifying moments would change everything between them, transforming prejudice into something neither of them saw coming. But when his mother arrived to meet the woman who risked everything for her son, the real test of whether people can truly change was just beginning. If you want to know how this incredible story of forgiveness and redemption unfolds, subscribe and tell me what city you're watching from. The morning air was still cool when Aisha Coleman pushed through the glass doors of Riverside Gardens at 5:30 sharp. She liked these quiet hours before the world woke up. The old apartment complex slept peacefully along the river, its brick walls catching the first hints of sunrise. Aisha moved through the hallways with practiced ease, her cleaning cart rolling softly over worn carpet. She knew every creaky floorboard, every scuff mark that wouldn't come out no matter how hard she scrubbed. This place had character, her father always said. Character and problems. At 27, Aisha had been working here for 3 years. She took pride in her work, even if others didn't always notice. She made sure the brass mailboxes gleamed, that the lobby smelled like lemon instead of old coffee, and that every surface was spotless before the first tenant stumbled down for their morning paper. Mrs. Patterson from 2B waved as she passed, heading out for her daily walk. "Morning, dear. You're an angel for keeping this place so nice." "Just doing my job," Aisha replied with a smile, but warmth spread through her chest. Kind words meant something. She was wiping down the front desk when voices drifted from the maintenance office down the hall. The door was cracked open, and she could hear Tom Alvarez, the building supervisor, talking with someone. "Need someone reliable for the maintenance position," Tom was saying. "Someone who knows buildings, who cares about the work." Aisha paused, cloth in hand. Her father, Samuel, had been looking for steady work since his last job ended 2 months ago. He'd worked maintenance for 30 years, knew heating systems and plumbing like some people knew their own names. "I was thinking about Samuel Coleman," Tom continued. "Aisha's dad. He came by last week asking about openings. Solid guy, good references." Aisha's heart lifted. Maybe things were finally looking up for her father. He'd been trying so hard to hide his worry about money, but she saw it in the way he counted change at the grocery store, in how he turned down her offers to help with bills. Then, another voice cut through her hope like a cold blade. "Don't hire her, Dad." The words were flat, final. Aisha froze, recognizing the voice of Ethan Moore, the building owner. She'd seen him around, tall, brown-haired, always looking like he'd rather be somewhere else. "Ethan, he's really qualified," Tom started. "I said no." Ethan's voice was sharper now. "Find someone else." The office went quiet. Aisha's hands trembled as she gripped the cleaning cloth. She heard chairs scraping, footsteps moving toward the door. Quickly, she pushed her cart around the corner, her heart hammering against her ribs. Why? The question burned in her throat. Her father was good at what he did. He was honest, hard-working, respected by everyone who knew him. What could Ethan Moore possibly have against him? The answer whispered itself in her mind, ugly and familiar. She pushed it away, but it clung like smoke. Aisha finished her rounds in a haze, going through the motions while her thoughts churned. By 8 o'clock, the building was buzzing with morning activity. She was loading her cart when her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Heard about a maintenance opening at your work. Might stop by today to ask about it." Her chest tightened. She stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. What could she say? That she'd overheard the owner dismiss him without even meeting him? That his 30 years of experience meant nothing to a man who barely knew his name? "Maybe wait a day or two," she texted back. "Not sure if they're ready to interview yet." It wasn't a lie exactly, but it tasted bitter anyway. The afternoon dragged on. Aisha found herself watching for Ethan Moore, noting his movements through the building. He walked like he owned the place, which he did, but there was something careful about it too, like he was trying not to touch anything unnecessarily. Around 3 o'clock, she saw him walking with Tom near the mailboxes. Her heart sped up as they approached her area. She kept her head down, organizing supplies she'd already organized twice. "About that maintenance position," Tom was saying quietly. "I really think we should consider—" "I already told you," Ethan interrupted. "Don't hire her dad. Find someone else." This time, Aisha was close enough to hear everything, close enough to see the way Ethan glanced in her direction, like he knew exactly who her dad was, close enough to catch the slight emphasis on the word her. The truth hit her like cold water. He knew Samuel Coleman was her father, and he didn't want either of them there. Tom's face reddened. "Ethan, it's final." Ethan's voice carried the weight of ownership, of money, of power. "I don't want any complications." They walked away, leaving Aisha alone with her cart, and the echo of those words. Complications. As if her father's need for work was somehow a threat, as if she was something to be managed rather than a person who showed up early and stayed late to keep this place running. She finished her shift mechanically, muscle memory guiding her through the last hour. The cheerful goodbye from Mrs. Patterson barely registered. The satisfied feeling she usually got from seeing the lobby sparkle felt hollow. At home, the smell of her Aunt Ruth's famous chicken and rice filled the small apartment. Samuel sat at the kitchen table, reading something on his phone, his weathered hands gentle with the device Aisha had bought him last Christmas. "There's my working girl," he said, looking up with a smile that made her chest ache. "How was your day?" "Fine," she managed, hanging her jacket on the back of a chair. "Same as always." Ruth emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. At 55, she was smaller than Aisha, but somehow took up more space, her presence filling every room with warmth and no-nonsense wisdom. "You look tired, baby," Ruth said, studying Aisha's face. "Everything okay at work?" "Just a long day." Aisha forced a smile. "Something smells incredible." "Your favorite," Samuel said proudly. "Ruth's been cooking since noon." They gathered around the small table, Ruth piling plates high with rice and perfectly seasoned chicken. This was home, the three of them sharing stories over simple food, Samuel's deep laugh mixing with Ruth's gentle teasing. "I've been thinking about that maintenance job," Samuel said, cutting into his chicken. "The one at your building. Might go over tomorrow, see if I can talk to the supervisor." Aisha's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Dad, maybe—" "I know what you're thinking," he continued, eyes bright with hope. "That I'm too old, that they want someone younger. But I've got experience. I know buildings inside and out. Fixed everything from boilers to broken hearts." Ruth laughed. "Don't oversell yourself, Sam." But Samuel was serious now, leaning forward. 30 years of steady work, good references. I kept the Fletcher building running for 15 years without a major breakdown. That has to count for something." "Of course it does," Aisha said quietly. The words felt like glass in her throat. "Besides," Samuel continued, "your supervisor, Tom, he seems like a fair man, the kind who cares about doing things right." He was right about Tom. The building supervisor was decent, careful, someone who judged people by their work rather than their appearance. But Tom wasn't the one making decisions. "Dad," Aisha started, then stopped. How could she tell him what she'd heard? How could she explain that his qualifications didn't matter, that his years of experience meant nothing to a man who saw only complications? "What is it, sweetheart?" Samuel's voice was gentle, concerned. "Nothing. I want you to be careful. Don't get your hopes up too high." Samuel reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His palm was rough from decades of honest work, warm and steady. "I know things have been hard since I lost the last job, but good work finds good people, always has." Ruth nodded approvingly. "That's the truth. Your daddy raised you with those values, Aisha. Work hard, treat people right, and the rest follows." Aisha squeezed her father's hand, trying to share his faith. But Ethan Moore's words echoed in her mind. "Don't hire her dad. I don't want any complications." After dinner, she excused herself early, claiming exhaustion. In her bedroom, she sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at her reflection in the dresser mirror. The same face that had looked back at her all her life suddenly felt different, marked by something she couldn't wash away. She thought about Mrs. Patterson's kind words that morning, about Tom's respect for her father's qualifications, about Ruth's certainty that good work would be rewarded. These people saw her clearly, saw her value, her dignity, her humanity. But Ethan Moore saw something else entirely. Something that made her father unsuitable before he'd even applied. Something that made her presence a complication rather than an asset. The unfairness of it burned in her chest. She'd worked so hard to prove herself, showing up early, staying late, taking pride in every clean surface and organized supply closet. But none of that mattered if someone had already decided what she was worth based on nothing more than the color of her skin. Sleep came slowly that night, filled with dreams of her father's disappointed face and Ethan Moore's dismissive voice. When morning came, Aisha dressed carefully for work, steeling herself for another day in a building owned by a man who saw her family as a problem to be avoided. But as she walked through the quiet lobby in the pre-dawn darkness, starting her rounds with the same professional care she always brought to the job, she made herself a promise. Whatever Ethan Moore thought of her, she would not give him any reason to question her work. She would be better than his prejudices, stronger than his assumptions, even if it meant watching her father's hope slowly fade away. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, dark and heavy with the promise of rain. The Weather Service had issued watches for the next few days, nothing unusual for this time of year, but enough to make people glance nervously at the river that ran just beyond the building's back parking lot. Aisha barely noticed the changing sky. She had more immediate concerns than the weather, more pressing storms brewing right here in the halls she kept so clean. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm, but everything felt different now. When Ethan Moore appeared in the lobby around 9, checking his phone and looking impatient, Aisha felt the weight of his presence like a stone in her chest. He nodded, absently in her direction, the kind of acknowledgement you'd give to furniture or fixtures, things that served a purpose but weren't really there. She wanted to say something, to ask him directly why her father wasn't good enough. But she needed this job. Her father needed her to keep this job. So she smiled politely and continued cleaning the already spotless brass handrails, swallowing words that tasted like bitter medicine. The storm clouds continued to build throughout the morning, mirroring the tension growing in Aisha's chest. Change was coming. She could feel it in the air, heavy and electric with possibility. The question was whether that change would bring healing or destruction. For now, all she could do was keep working, keep hoping, and keep believing that somehow truth and justice would find a way to break through the clouds. The radio in the maintenance office crackled with weather updates as Aisha organized cleaning supplies the next morning. Flood watch extended through Friday evening, river levels rising steadily due to upstream rainfall. Tom Alvarez turned down the volume and shook his head. "Same warnings every year," he muttered to himself. "You'd think people would get tired of crying wolf." Through the office window, Aisha could see the river beyond the parking lot. It did look higher than usual, brown and swift with runoff from the hills. Her father had taught her to read water, how it moved when it was angry, how it whispered warnings before it shouted. "Look serious to me," she said quietly. Tom glanced up, surprised. He wasn't used to her speaking up during his morning routine. "You think so?" "My dad worked maintenance at the Fletcher building for 15 years. It flooded twice. He always said you could tell 3 days out by watching the current." Tom stepped to the window, studying the water with new attention. "What's it telling you now?" Aisha joined him, noting the way debris swirled in tight circles, how the water had already crept up the concrete embankment. "That we should take it serious." But when Ethan Moore arrived an hour later, he barely glanced at the weather reports Tom tried to show him. "It's just rain," Ethan said, scrolling through his phone. "The building's been here 40 years. A little water never hurt anything." "The basement's already damp," Tom pressed. "Maybe we should check the sump pumps, move some equipment. Don't create problems where there aren't any." Ethan's tone carried the same dismissive authority Aisha had heard before. Focus on real issues. Real issues, like keeping her father unemployed, Aisha thought bitterly. That afternoon, the sky opened up. Rain hammered the windows with increasing force, turning the parking lot into a maze of puddles and streams. Aisha found herself reassigned to evening shift coverage, something about being the most reliable staff member. The praise might have felt good under different circumstances, but now it just meant more time in close quarters with Ethan Moore. He stayed late too, pacing the lobby and making phone calls about property insurance and tenant complaints. Twice, Aisha caught him glancing in her direction with what looked like discomfort. Good, she thought. At least her presence bothered him as much as his bothered her. Around 6 o'clock, her phone buzzed with a text from her father, still planning to stop by tomorrow about that job, praying hard about it. The simple faith in those words made her throat tight. Samuel Coleman had been praying about this job for weeks, believing that his skills and experience would speak for themselves. He had no idea that the decision had already been made by a man who'd never even met him. She was still staring at the message when Ethan appeared beside her cart. "Everything all right?" he asked. The concern in his voice surprised her. She looked up to find him watching her with something that might have been genuine interest. For a moment she wondered if she'd misunderstood. If maybe. Then she remembered his voice in the office. "Don't hire her dad. I don't want any complications." "Fine," she said simply, turning back to her work. But Ethan didn't leave. He stood there awkwardly, hands in his pockets, like he wanted to say something else. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of rain against glass. "This weather's really coming down," he finally said. "Yes, sir." She kept her voice neutral, professional. "Tom thinks we should be worried." "Tom's a smart man." Another pause. Then, "Your father works in maintenance, doesn't he?" Aisha's hands stilled on the cleaning cloth. "Yes, sir." Has he ever dealt with flooding?" The question hung in the air between them. Here was her chance to tell him about Samuel's experience with water damage, about the 2 floods he'd managed at the Fletcher building, about his 30 years of knowledge that could help protect this place. "Yes," she said quietly. "He has." Ethan nodded slowly. "Good to know." But he walked away without saying anything else, leaving Aisha alone with her questions and the growing sound of rain. By 8 o'clock, the weather had turned vicious. Wind howled around the building's corners, rattling windows and sending trash bins skittering across the parking lot. The river, visible through the back windows, had risen noticeably since morning. Most of the tenants had gathered in the community room, sharing nervous jokes about the storm while keeping one eye on the weather reports. Mrs. Patterson sat knitting in her favorite chair, needles clicking peacefully despite the chaos outside. 43 years I've lived along this river," she told anyone who would listen. "Seen worse storms than this. This old building's solid as a rock." But Aisha noticed how the older woman's eyes kept drifting to the windows, how her knitting needles moved a little faster with each roll of thunder. Around 9:30, the emergency alert system started broadcasting evacuation warnings for low-lying areas along the river. Tom appeared in the community room, his face grave but calm. "Folks, we're being asked to evacuate as a precaution," he announced. "The city's opened the community center on Highland Avenue. I've got a van coming to help transport anyone who needs it." The room erupted in worried chatter. Mrs. Patterson set down her knitting with shaking hands. Mr. Gonzalez from 3A started asking rapid questions about his medications, his cat, his important papers. "What about the building?" someone called out. "Who's going to watch things here?" "I'll stay until everyone's out safely," Tom said. "Make sure everything's secured." "I'll stay too," Ethan said from the doorway. He'd appeared without anyone noticing, his hair damp from checking outside conditions. "It's my responsibility." The next hour passed in controlled chaos. Tenants packed essential items, helped elderly neighbors, and formed carpools for those whose vehicles were parked in the lower lot. Aisha helped Mrs. Patterson gather her medications and a few precious photographs, her heart aching as the older woman apologized for being such trouble. "You're no trouble at all," Aisha said firmly. "We take care of each other, remember?" By 11 o'clock, the building was nearly empty. Only a handful of people remained. Tom making his final security rounds, Ethan checking windows and doors, and Aisha helping the last stragglers to the waiting van. "You should go too," Tom told her as they watched the van disappear into the storm. "This isn't your job anymore tonight." But something made her hesitate. The building felt wrong somehow, too quiet, too empty. The storm was getting worse, not better, and the basement had been making odd noises all evening, creaks and groans that didn't sound like normal settling. "I'll stay a few more minutes," she said. "Make sure nothing's been forgotten." Tom nodded gratefully. I'll do one more check of the basement. The alarms down there have been acting up all day. Want me to come with you? No, you've done enough. Why don't you help Ethan with the upper floors? But as Tom headed downstairs, Aisha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. She'd heard those basement noises before, at the Fletcher building right before the second flood. Her father had taught her to recognize the sound of a building in distress. She found Ethan in the lobby, staring out at the parking lot where water now reached halfway up the car wheels. The river had become a monster, dark and angry, reaching far beyond its normal banks. "We should go," she said quietly. "This is getting dangerous." He nodded absently. "Just waiting for Tom to finish his rounds. Then we'll lock up and—" A sharp crack echoed through the building, followed by a low rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The lights flickered, went out for a heart-stopping moment, then came back dimmer than before. "What was that?" Ethan's voice was tight with sudden fear. Aisha's blood turned cold. She knew that sound. "The basement," she said, already moving toward the stairs. "Something's wrong in the basement." They reached the stairwell together, calling Tom's name. No answer. The emergency lighting cast eerie shadows down the concrete steps, and Aisha could hear something that made her stomach drop, the sound of rushing water. "Tom!" Ethan shouted. "Tom, are you down there?" Still no response. Ethan started down the stairs, but Aisha caught his arm. "Wait," she said. "Listen." They both froze, straining to hear over the storm. From below came the unmistakable sound of someone calling for help. Faint, desperate, nearly drowned out by the growing roar of water. "The door," Ethan said suddenly. "The basement door swings shut automatically when the power fluctuates. If he's trapped—" He was moving before he finished the sentence, taking the stairs two at a time. Aisha followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. At the bottom, they found the heavy fire door sealed tight, water seeping steadily underneath. Ethan yanked on the handle. Nothing. The door was either jammed or blocked from the other side. "Tom!" he yelled, pounding on the metal. "Can you hear me?" A muffled response came from beyond the door, too faint to understand, but definitely human. Alive, at least for now. "We need to get help," Aisha said. "Call 911, get emergency services." "There's no time." Ethan was studying the door with desperate focus. "Look at that water. The level's rising fast by the time help gets here." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Aisha stared at the door, her mind racing. She knew this building's layout better than anyone, except maybe Tom himself. She knew about the utility access tunnel that connected the basement to the mechanical room, knew about the maintenance corridors that most people never saw. "There's another way in," she said suddenly. "The utility tunnel. It's narrow, but it connects to the mechanical room." "Where?" "Through the old laundry room, behind the storage lockers. But it's dangerous. If the water's rising as fast as it sounds—" "Show me." She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since she'd started working here. His face was pale but determined, his eyes clear despite the fear she could see lurking there. This was the same man who'd dismissed her father without a thought, who'd reduced her to a complication in his tidy world. But right now none of that mattered. Tom was trapped, possibly dying, and she was the only one who knew how to reach him. "This way," she said, and led Ethan Moore into the darkness. The utility tunnel was smaller than Aisha remembered, barely wide enough for one person to crawl through. She led the way with her phone's flashlight, Ethan close behind her, both of them moving as quietly as possible, through the narrow space. "How do you know about this?" Ethan asked, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "My dad showed me when I first started working here. He said every building has its secrets and smart people learn them all." The irony wasn't lost on her, using her father's knowledge to save someone from a building where Samuel Coleman wasn't good enough to work. But there wasn't time to think about that now. Water dripped steadily from somewhere above them, each drop like a countdown timer. Through the tunnel walls, they could hear the storm raging, punctuated by the ominous sound of rising water. The tunnel opened into the mechanical room, a cramped space filled with pipes and electrical panels. Everything was damp, but not yet flooded. Aisha oriented herself quickly, remembering the building's layout from countless maintenance calls she'd accompanied her father on at other properties. The basement access should be through that panel, she said, pointing to a metal grate near the floor. But we need to be careful. If we open it and the water rushes up... A crash echoed from somewhere below them, followed by Tom's voice shouting for help. Closer now, but filled with panic. Ethan was already at the grate, working the latches with shaking fingers. "Tom, we're here! We're coming!" The metal panel swung open, revealing a drop into darkness. Water gleamed about 4 feet below, much higher than it should be. And there, clinging to a pipe near the far wall, was Tom Alvarez. The building supervisor looked up at them with relief and terror mixed on his face. "Thank God. The water came up so fast. The pumps failed and the door jammed. I can't swim very well." "We'll get you out," Aisha called down. "Just hold on." But even as she said it, she could see the water level rising. What had been 4 feet down was now 3.5, the surface dotted with floating debris from the basement storage area. "I'm going down," Ethan said, already moving toward the opening. "Wait." Aisha grabbed his arm. "You don't know this basement. There's electrical equipment, sharp edges, things that could trap you or worse." "Then what do you suggest?" She looked at the rising water, at Tom's frightened face, at the phone in her hand that showed no signal bars. Outside, the storm was getting worse, not better. Emergency services were probably dealing with dozens of calls just like this one. "I'll go," she said quietly. "What?" "No, absolutely not. I know this building better than you do. I know where the safe paths are, where the electrical panels are located, how to avoid the worst hazards." Ethan stared at her. "I can't let you risk your life for what?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "For Tom? For your building? Or just because you don't trust me to do it right?" The words hung between them in the damp air. Below, Tom called out again, his voice weaker now. "That's not what I meant," Ethan said. "I meant I can't ask you to risk your life for my mistake. I should have listened about the flood warnings. I should have evacuated everyone sooner." For a moment, Aisha saw something different in his face. Not the dismissive property owner who'd rejected her father's site unseen, but a man genuinely tormented by the consequences of his decisions. "This isn't about blame," she said firmly. "This is about getting Tom out alive, and I'm the best chance he has." Before Ethan could argue further, she lowered herself through the opening. The water was shockingly cold, reaching almost to her chest. The current was stronger than she'd expected, trying to pull her toward the far end of the basement, where she could hear the ominous sound of more water rushing in. "Aisha!" Tom's voice was tight with relief and fear. "Be careful. There's live electrical somewhere. I can see sparks." She moved carefully through the dark water, testing each step before putting her full weight down. The basement floor was uneven, filled with obstacles she couldn't see. Twice she felt sharp metal brush against her legs, reminders that one wrong step could mean injury or worse. "Talk to me, Tom," she called out. "How are you holding up?" "Cold, tired, but okay for now." His voice was steadier now that help was close. "The pipe I'm holding feels solid, but my hands are getting numb." Aisha reached him just as her phone's flashlight started to dim. In the weak light, she could see that Tom was barely keeping his head above water, his grip on the pipe the only thing between him and drowning. "I'm going to help you to the opening," she said. "But we need to move fast. The water's still rising. I don't think I can swim that far." "You don't have to swim. I'll guide you. Just trust me." She positioned herself beside him, letting him wrap one arm around her shoulders while she found handholds along the wall. The journey back to the opening felt endless, each step a battle against the current and the growing darkness. Halfway there, Tom stumbled. His weight pulled them both underwater for a terrifying moment before Aisha managed to get them both back to the surface, gasping and sputtering. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, sorry, Don't apologize, we're almost there." Above them, Ethan's voice called out encouragement and directions. When they finally reached the opening, he was lying flat on his stomach, reaching down to help pull Tom up. "Careful," Aisha warned. "He's exhausted and hypothermic." Together they managed to get Tom through the opening and into the mechanical room. He collapsed on the floor, shivering violently but alive. Aisha hauled herself up last, her own strength nearly spent. For a moment, they all just sat there in the dim emergency lighting, breathing hard and processing what had just happened. Then Ethan was moving, stripping off his jacket to wrap around Tom's shoulders. "We need to get him warm and dry," he said. "And we need to Get out of this building before the lights went out completely. Emergency power kicked in a few seconds later, but the brief darkness was a clear warning that the building's systems were failing. The tunnel, Aisha said. We can get back to the main level the same way we came down. I'll never fit, Tom said through chattering teeth. I'm too big and I can barely move. He was right. The utility tunnel that had been tight for Aisha and Ethan would be impossible for the stockier building supervisor in his current condition. There's another way, Aisha said slowly. The main stairwell should still be clear above the first floor. If we can get to the lobby level. How? The basement is flooded and the emergency stairs are underwater by now. Aisha closed her eyes, picturing the building's layout. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, sharing the lessons of 30 years in maintenance work. Every building tells you its secrets if you know how to listen. The freight elevator, she said suddenly. It has manual override controls. If the power holds long enough. It was risky. If the elevator failed between floors, they'd be trapped. If the basement flooded completely before they could reach it, the shaft might become a death trap. But it was their best chance. They made their way through the mechanical room's maze of pipes and equipment, Tom leaning heavily on Ethan, while Aisha led the way. The freight elevator was at the far end of the basement level, accessible through a maintenance corridor that was ankle-deep in water, but still passable. The elevator car was stuck between floors, but Aisha managed to activate the manual controls she'd watched her father use dozens of times on similar systems. Slowly, grudgingly, the ancient machinery responded. Come on, she whispered to the building. Just a little more. Just get us up one floor. The car lurched upward with mechanical groans that sounded like a dying animal. Water dripped through the shaft above them, and somewhere in the distance they could hear the sound of more structural failure. When the doors finally opened on the main floor lobby, all three of them stumbled out like survivors of a shipwreck. The lobby was dim but dry, though water was visible through the front windows, creeping steadily across the parking lot. We need to get to higher ground, Ethan said. The community center or... My apartment, Aisha interrupted. I live on Highland Avenue, up the hill. It's closer than the community center, and we can get Tom warmed up properly. Ethan looked at her in surprise. She realized it might be the first time he'd thought of her as someone with a life outside this building, someone with a home and family, and a place in the world beyond her cleaning cart. Are you sure? He asked. I'm sure. They made their way through the storm to Aisha's car, the only vehicle left in the upper parking lot. The drive up Highland Avenue was treacherous, with water running across the road and debris scattered everywhere. But Aisha knew these streets, knew which routes stayed clear even in the worst weather. When they pulled into the driveway of her small apartment building, Ruth was waiting at the window. She had the door open before they reached the porch, her eyes taking in their soaked clothes and exhausted faces with the quick assessment of someone who'd dealt with plenty of emergencies. Get inside, she said briskly. I'll get towels and hot coffee. Samuel emerged from the kitchen, his eyes going immediately to Aisha. Baby girl, what happened? Are you hurt? I'm okay, Dad. This is Tom from work, and this is... She hesitated for a moment. This is Ethan Moore. He owns the building. Samuel's expression shifted slightly as he processed the name, but his fundamental decency won out. Any friend of Aisha's, he said simply, extending his hand to Ethan. Let's get you folks dry. For the next hour, Ruth and Samuel moved with the quiet efficiency of people who'd weathered their share of crises. Tom was wrapped in warm blankets and fed hot soup until his shivering stopped. Dry clothes appeared, Samuel's for Tom, some of Aisha's larger items for Ethan, who looked oddly vulnerable in borrowed sweatpants and a college t-shirt. Aisha sat at the kitchen table, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what they'd been through. They could have died down there. Tom definitely would have died without their intervention, and she'd been the one to lead the rescue, using knowledge her father had shared with her over the years. She glanced at Ethan, who was sitting quietly in the corner, holding a mug of coffee with both hands. He'd been watching her family with something that looked like wonder, the way Ruth anticipated everyone's needs, how Samuel offered help without being asked, the easy warmth that filled the small apartment despite the storm raging outside. Thank you, he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet conversation. I don't know how to thank you for what you did tonight. You don't need to thank me, Aisha replied. Anyone would have done the same. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Not everyone would have risked their life for a coworker. Not everyone would have known how to navigate that flooded basement. Not everyone would have opened their home to strangers in the middle of a storm. Ethan seemed to know it too. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Gratitude, yes, but something else. Something that looked almost like shame. "Still," he said quietly, "thank you." Outside, the storm continued its assault on the city, but inside the small apartment something had changed. The barriers that had stood between them, prejudice and hurt and willful blindness, had begun to crack under the weight of shared danger and simple human decency. It was a beginning, but Aisha had learned enough about life to know that beginnings were often the easiest part. The real work would come later, in the quiet moments when the drama had faded and people had to decide what kind of truth they were willing to live with. For now, though, it was enough that they were all alive, all safe, all human in the warm light of her family's kitchen. The rest would have to wait for morning. Morning came gray and subdued, the storm's fury spent but its damage everywhere. Aisha woke to the sound of news reports drifting from the kitchen, where Ruth was already making breakfast for their unexpected guests. River crested at 11:47 last night, nearly 4 feet above flood stage. Emergency crews are still responding to calls throughout the downtown area. She found Tom and Ethan at the kitchen table, both looking better after a night's sleep, but still bearing the quiet marks of trauma. Tom was on his phone with his wife, his voice soft with relief as he assured her he was safe. Ethan sat quietly, staring into a cup of coffee like he was trying to read something in its depths. "How's the building?" Aisha asked, settling into the chair across from him. "Gone," he said simply. "Tom's been checking with emergency services. The basement's completely flooded. First floor took major water damage. It'll be months before anyone can live there again." The weight of it settled over the table. Riverside Gardens had been home to 37 families, most of them elderly or working-class people without many other options. Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Gonzalez, the young mother from 1C with twin toddlers, all of them displaced, all of them facing an uncertain future. "What about the tenants?" Ruth asked, appearing with a plate of scrambled eggs. "Where will they go?" "Insurance will cover temporary housing," Ethan said. "I'm working with a relocation company to find places for everyone. It's just—" He ran a hand through his hair, looking older than his 30 years. "Some of these people have been living there for decades. Mrs. Patterson moved in when the building first opened. It's not just an apartment to her, it's home." Samuel entered from the living room, where he'd been watching the news coverage. "Saw the building on TV," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, son. That's got to be hard." Ethan looked up at him, and Aisha saw something pass between the two men, a recognition of shared loss, perhaps, or simply the understanding that came from caring about something bigger than yourself. "Thank you, Mr. Coleman. I know you were hoping for work there." Samuel's eyebrows rose slightly. He glanced at Aisha, who felt her cheeks warm. She'd never told her father about the maintenance position, had never found a way to explain why his qualifications suddenly didn't matter. "Well," Samuel said carefully, "sometimes things work out different than we plan." An awkward silence fell over the table. Aisha could feel the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on them, all the words that had been said and unsaid over the past few days. Tom finished his phone call and cleared his throat. "I should probably head home. My wife's been worried sick, and we need to start figuring out what comes next." "Of course," Ruth said, already moving to pack him leftover food. "You take care of yourself, and if you need anything, anything at all, you call us." After Tom left, the apartment felt smaller somehow. Ethan lingered at the table, clearly struggling with something he wanted to say but couldn't quite find the words for. "I should go too," he finally said. "Let you folks get back to your normal routine." But as he stood to leave, Samuel spoke up. "Before you go, son, can I ask you something?" Ethan paused, something wary flickering in his eyes. "Sure. That maintenance job Tom mentioned, was there really no opening, or was there another reason you didn't want to hire me?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Aisha held her breath, watching Ethan's face cycle through surprise, discomfort, and what looked like genuine pain. "Mr. Coleman, He stopped, started again. "I made a mistake. A big one." "What kind of mistake?" Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. "The kind where you judge someone before you know them." where you make decisions based on things that don't matter, things that shouldn't matter. Samuel studied him for a long moment. You talking about the color of my skin? Yes. The word came out barely above a whisper. Yes, I am. The honesty of it was somehow worse than if he'd tried to make excuses. Aisha felt tears prick her eyes, for her father's dignity, for the job he'd lost before he'd even had a chance to apply, for the casual cruelty of prejudice wrapped in polite words. Why? Samuel's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. You never met me, never saw my work, never even talked to me. I don't know. Ethan's voice cracked slightly. Fear, maybe, stupidity. I told myself I was being careful, avoiding complications. But the truth is, I was just being what my mother raised me to be. Ruth made a soft sound of disapproval. Samuel's jaw tightened. And what's that? Someone who thinks the color of a person's skin tells you something about their character. Someone who makes assumptions instead of asking questions. Someone who... Ethan's voice broke completely. Someone who would have let Tom die in that basement if it wasn't for your daughter. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through the quiet kitchen. Aisha felt something loosen in her chest, not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that genuine remorse was the beginning of something better. Aisha saved Tom because that's who she is, Samuel said firmly. That's how Ruth and I raised her, to see people in trouble and help if she can. Color's got nothing to do with it. I know that now. Ethan looked directly at Aisha for the first time since his confession began. I know that you're the best employee I've ever had. I know that you understand that building better than anyone. I know that your father raised an incredible woman, and if he's half as good at maintenance as he is at raising daughters, then I'm an idiot for not hiring him on the spot. You are an idiot, Ruth said bluntly, but there was no malice in it. Question is, what are you going to do about it now? Ethan straightened, something shifting in his posture. I'm going to rebuild, he said. And when I do, I want your husband to oversee the whole project. I want him to be my head of maintenance, not just for the rebuild, but permanently, if he'll take the job. Samuel was quiet for so long that Aisha wondered if he'd decided not to answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured and careful. That's a generous offer. But respect isn't something you can just decide to give someone after you've already taken it away. Trust has to be earned. You're right, Ethan said. You're absolutely right. So let me earn it. Let me prove that I can be better than I was. How? However you think is best. You tell me what it takes, and I'll do it. Samuel glanced at his daughter, at Ruth, at the man standing in their kitchen asking for a chance to prove his worth. You really want to know? Yes, sir. Then start by listening. Really listening. Not just to me, but to people who don't look like you, who don't have what you have, who see the world different than you do. And when they tell you something that makes you uncomfortable, don't dismiss it. Don't explain it away. Just listen. Ethan nodded slowly. I can do that. Can you? Samuel's eyes were sharp, assessing. Because it's harder than it sounds. Means admitting you don't know everything. Means changing your mind about things you've believed your whole life. Means telling your mama that the way she raised you wasn't entirely right. A shadow crossed Ethan's face at the mention of his mother, but he didn't look away. Yes, sir. I can do that. The kitchen fell quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now. The pause before a decision, before a commitment that would change everything that came after. All right then, Samuel said finally. When you're ready to start rebuilding, you call me. We'll see what kind of man you really are when nobody's watching. Ethan's relief was visible, but tempered with something that looked like determination. Thank you, Mr. Coleman. I won't let you down. Don't thank me yet, Samuel said. Thank me when the job's done right. After Ethan left, the apartment felt different, lighter somehow, as if a weight they'd all been carrying had finally been shared. Aisha helped Ruth clear the breakfast dishes while Samuel settled into his favorite chair with the newspaper. You think he means it? Ruth asked quietly, loading plates into the dishwasher. I think he wants to mean it, Aisha replied. Whether he can follow through, we'll see. Your daddy gave him a fair chance, more than fair considering. Aisha nodded, but her thoughts were complicated. She'd seen something in Ethan's eyes during his confession, not just guilt, but genuine horror at his own behavior. That had to count for something. The days that followed were a whirlwind of insurance paperwork, temporary housing arrangements, and difficult conversations with displaced tenants. Ethan threw himself into the work with an intensity that surprised everyone who knew him. He visited every family personally, made sure everyone had what they needed, and started planning a rebuild that would be better than what had been lost. True to his word, he called Samuel within the week. "I want to do this right," he said, sitting across from Aisha's father in the small apartment's living room. "Not just fixing what was broken, but building something better, something that serves the community instead of just collecting rent." Samuel listened as Ethan outlined his plans: energy-efficient systems, accessible design, community spaces, and below-market rent for seniors and working families. It was ambitious, expensive, and exactly what the neighborhood needed. "Sounds good on paper," Samuel said when Ethan finished, "but plans are easy, building's harder. You sure you're ready for that?" "With your help, I am." They started the next Monday. Aisha watched from her window as her father walked down Highland Avenue toward the construction site, lunch bucket in hand and purpose in his step. For the first time in months, Samuel Coleman was going to work. But the real test came 3 weeks later, when Ethan's mother arrived for an unexpected visit. Lena Moore was exactly what Aisha had imagined: perfectly styled, expensively dressed, and radiating the kind of confidence that came from never having to doubt your place in the world. She surveyed the construction site with barely concealed dismay. "This isn't what I expected," she told Ethan over dinner at his house that evening. Aisha was there at Samuel's invitation, along with Tom and several other members of the construction team. "What did you expect?" Ethan asked carefully. "Something more practical. You're spending a fortune on accommodations for people who can't afford to pay for them anyway." The table went quiet. Aisha felt her father stiffen beside her, saw Tom's jaw clench, but Ethan's response was calm and clear. "These people are my neighbors, Mom. They deserve safe, comfortable homes just like anyone else." "Of course they do, but—" "No buts." Ethan's voice carried a firmness that surprised everyone, including his mother. "This is the right thing to do. It's the kind of building this community needs, and it's the kind of project I'm proud to put my name on." Lena's eyes narrowed slightly. "You've changed." "Yes, I have. I hope you know what you're doing." "I do." Ethan looked around the table, his gaze lingering on Samuel and Aisha. "I'm finally doing what I should have been doing all along." The conversation moved on to safer topics after that, but the message was clear. Whatever hold his mother's opinions had once held over him, Ethan Moore was making his own decisions now. The rebuild took 6 months. Aisha watched it take shape from her apartment window, a structure that grew stronger and more beautiful each day under her father's careful supervision. Samuel worked with quiet pride, his 30 years of experience finally recognized and valued. But more than that, she watched Ethan change. He spent time on the construction site, learning from Samuel and the other workers. He listened when people talked about their needs, their concerns, their dreams for what the building could become. He made mistakes, plenty of them, but he learned from each one. The night before the building's reopening, Aisha found herself walking along the riverbank where it had all begun. The water ran peacefully now, contained within its proper channels, no longer the angry force that had nearly claimed 3 lives. "Thought I might find you here." She turned to find Ethan approaching, hands in his pockets, looking tired but content. The past 6 months had changed him. His face was leaner, weathered by construction site sun and wind, and his eyes held a confidence that hadn't been there before. "Just remembering," she said. "Remembering what?" "That night. How scared I was. How sure I was that we were all going to die." Ethan stopped beside her, both of them looking out over the dark water. "I remember thinking that if we didn't make it out, the last thing I'd ever done was hurt your family for no good reason. That seemed like a terrible way to leave the world. But we did make it out. We did. And I got a chance to do better." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the gentle sound of water over stone. Finally, Aisha spoke. "My father respects you now, you know, really respects you. That means everything to me. It should. He doesn't give that lightly. Ethan turned to face her fully. What about you, Aisha? Do you think you could ever forgive me? The question hung between them, weighted with months of changed behavior and genuine effort. Aisha thought about the man who had casually dismissed her father, the property owner who had seen her as a complication. Then she thought about the man who had risked his life in a flooded basement, who had humbled himself before her family, who had spent 6 months proving that people could change. I think, she said carefully, that forgiveness is something you earn one day at a time, and I think you've made a pretty good start. Ethan's smile was small but genuine. I'll take that. They walked back toward the new building together, its windows glowing warmly in the darkness. Tomorrow, 37 families would move back home, not to the same place they had lost, but to something better, something built on lessons, learned from flood and prejudice and the simple truth that everyone deserved dignity. Mrs. Patterson was already back, her knitting needles clicking peacefully in apartment 2B. Mr. Gonzalez had his cat and his medications safely arranged in 3A. The young mother from 1C was planning a housewarming party for her twins, and in the basement, Samuel Coleman's workshop was already humming with activity, ready for whatever challenges the building might face, because now everyone knew that storms would come. The trick was building something strong enough to weather them together. Aisha glanced at Ethan as they reached the building's front steps. He was looking up at the structure with something that looked like wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe what they'd all accomplished. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For seeing something in me worth saving. She considered this, thinking about second chances and earned redemption and the way people could surprise you when they were given room to grow. We saved each other, she said finally. That's what people do. And as they climbed the steps together toward the warm light spilling from the lobby windows, Aisha knew it was true. Some storms destroyed everything in their path, but others, if you were brave enough to face them together, could wash away the things that didn't matter and leave something stronger in their place. The river flowed peacefully past, no longer a threat but a reminder of the power of nature, of the fragility of life, and of the extraordinary things that ordinary people could accomplish when they chose love over fear, understanding over prejudice, and hope over despair. In the quiet of the evening, with the new building glowing like a beacon against the darkness, it felt like the beginning of something beautiful.